Hey everybody, it's Nancy Miller with a special announcement. There's going to be a new episode of Dead Sleep tomorrow, that's Sunday night, for you to enjoy. And while you wait for that episode to come out tomorrow, I'm dropping one of the bonus episodes. It's the first Forensic Files Friday episode from a few months ago. It was so much fun to pay homage to the show that actually got me into falling asleep to true crime. And of course, that's because of the narrator and series host, Peter Thomas. If you've never fallen asleep to Forensic Files and you've never heard of Forensic Files, it doesn't really matter. Give this episode a listen, and if you like what you hear, become a paid subscriber to Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. You can subscribe for about $5 a month via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Patreon. And be sure to follow the show so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. That's Sunday, of an extra special super insomniac version of the podcast. Until next time, nighty-night. We all have our stories about how we got into true crime. But how we started falling asleep to true crime? Well, I have a theory. It's no accident. It's something called the Lifetime to True Crime Pipeline. And it started with the Golden Girls. If I recall correctly, I started watching the Golden Girls on the Lifetime network from 11 o'clock to midnight. And then, after that, was Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack, the OG. And then came Forensic Files. Late night reruns. There was something about Forensic Files that put me, and apparently a lot of other people, to sleep. And when you have insomnia, you'll try just about anything. And when you find something, you tend to stick with it. And there was something about the theme song and the approach to the show. It's just 22 minutes. But within those 22 minutes, they packed the full true crime arc. The people, the incident, the detective work, and of course, how cutting-edge forensic technology, a montage of gadgets that looked like they came from the Sharp Image catalog, can crack some of the most baffling mysteries. And the stories I liked the most usually had the survivors themselves, the people directly involved. But there were plenty of shows like that. So what made Forensic Files different? The voice of Peter Thomas. Peter Thomas was already famous for his commercial voiceovers. He was the voice of NBC, Coca-Cola, IBM, Nova, nature shows, breakfast drinks.
Tang, as nourishing here on Earth as in outer space.
Forensic Files for Peter Thomas was more than a voiceover gig. His voice and style of reading was so powerful and sticks with us because it didn't come from acting. It came from his own experience in real life. Back in the spring of 1945, near the end of World War II, Peter Thomas was a 21-year-old private first-class policeman who was sent to East Central Germany. What Peter Thomas saw, the horrors and the humanity, deeply affected him. And he brought that compassion and respect for victims and survivors of violent, senseless crime to every script, every line, every word he read on Forensic Files for the 15 years he voiced the show. And when Peter Thomas died in 2016, the original creator of the show, Paul Dowling, said that Peter Thomas was Forensic Files. My goal in retelling these Forensic Files episodes for Dead Sleep is to add another narrative layer to the originals and find new and compelling details around these stories that help breathe new life into a favorite series. and give our overactive minds something to think about as we drift off into the night. Oh, and as always, there are no depictions of graphic violence, but this story does go into a difficult pregnancy and complications around pregnancy that some people might want to be aware of before we listen tonight. Thank you again for subscribing to Dead Sleep. Every penny of your subscription goes right back into making the show. We put a lot of love and care into it, including tracking down the exact keyboard from the 90s that was used to make the original Forensic Files theme to craft our own special Dead Sleep version of that theme. I'm Nancy Miller, and this is the subscriber debut of Forensic Files Fridays. I hope you enjoy it. Gazing out into the glorious sunset of Key West, Florida, one evening in the year 2000, Michelle Baker felt like she had it all. Michelle was gorgeous. She looked a lot like the actress Michelle Pfeiffer, but with dark, shoulder-length hair and spiky bangs. This Michelle had a soft voice and a gentle demeanor, one that would bring comfort to anyone she would come across in her decade-long career as a paramedic and firefighter. And after one failed marriage in her 20s, at the age of 33, she'd finally met the guy of her dreams. A friend had introduced the two, and after a whirlwind romance, she was about to marry a handsome and successful doctor. They'd shared an immediate attraction, love at first sight. After an intense and passionate month, her new boyfriend, his name was Maynard, moved in with Michelle. And soon after, the icing on the cake was, after many, many years of wishing for a baby, she was finally, happily pregnant. So on this evening, it really felt like she was riding off into the sunset. A perfect guy, a happy home, and a baby on the way. But as soon as the sun set on that night in 2000, there was trouble in paradise. Her fiancé, Maynard Munsing, was the one who had the big idea. They'd flown down to Key West and elope, exchange vows, just the two of them, barefoot on the beach. Then, almost as soon as they had arrived, Maynard got cold feet. They'd come all the way to Key West from Ohio. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he changed his mind. He couldn't elope, he said. He really wanted his whole family to be there. They'd both been married and divorced before, so maybe it was better if they did wait, and their friends and family, including Maynard's young sons, could be there to celebrate. Michelle was crazy about Maynard. Maynard was the same age as Michelle, with dark brown hair, blue eyes, and a gentle, quiet demeanor that matched Michelle's. They were going to have a baby together, and Michelle wanted this relationship to last. So if he wanted to wait, okay, she respected his wishes. But things hadn't gone as Michelle had planned, and she was quietly devastated. And she decided to make the best out of the situation. A little vacation in Key West. They had several months before their baby was due to arrive. There was time to get married. While in Key West, the pair enjoyed a nice dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe, and in one photograph from their mini vacation, they're smiling and sipping festive tropical beverages, the kind with lots of fruit and umbrellas. The Hard Rock Cafe in Key West is located inside one of the oldest structures in Key West. a 3-story Victorian-era home built in the late 1800s. It was an historic landmark known for its architecture and for the rumor that the old house was haunted. That through the halls of the structure walked the ghost of its original owner, a sickly man named Robert Curry. The legend was that Robert Curry had lost the love of his life and took his own life on the 2nd floor. Though according to historical documents, it appears he might have actually died of cancer way up in upstate New York. True or not, there was a dark presence in this quaint place, a sinister force that would upend Michelle's life. And it started right around the time that Michelle and Maynard were finishing dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe, when out of nowhere, Michelle felt an intense pain in her stomach, a cramping and discomfort that was as painful as it was scary. By the time they made it back to the hotel, Michelle was doubled over and in agony. Here, this was supposed to be a relaxing time, but Michelle was ill, and she was worried. Michelle had endometriosis, a somewhat common and often painful condition that affected her reproductive system, and she worried that there was something wrong with the baby. Thankfully, she was engaged to a medical doctor, an ear, nose, and throat guy, who assured Michelle that she'd be fine. He put her to bed that night and comforted her, and the next day, the cramps were gone. When Michelle returned back home from Key West, Florida, to Ohio, she visited her doctor, who checked things out and assured Michelle everything seemed fine. That with endometriosis, she might expect some discomfort, but there were no issues with this pregnancy. Everything, the baby, would be fine. She just needed to relax, do whatever she could to reduce the stress. They'd recently moved into a beautiful home that Maynard had bought for $320,000. It was the perfect place to raise a family. A single-level ranch-style brick house surrounded by lush green grass and dogwood trees. With all that was going on, wedding plans, a baby on the way, a new home, Michelle could barely catch her breath. The cramps came back. The pain in her lower abdomen was so sharp, she doubled over again, just like the feeling she had at the Hard Rock Cafe. But worse. Michelle went to her doctor again, and he couldn't find anything wrong. Still, Michelle couldn't help but notice Maynard was acting distant. And when she pressed him on what was wrong, he revealed a secret that he'd been keeping from her and from himself. He still had lingering feelings for his ex, a woman he dated seriously before he met Michelle, 37-year-old Tammy Irwin. Michelle was stunned. She knew Tammy's name because, up until now, Maynard had nothing nice to say about Tammy. It had been a volatile and toxic relationship, at least that's what Maynard had said before. And now, he was saying he had lingering feelings. Michelle was in love with Maynard. He was the one. And he'd given her all of the signs that he was crazy about her too. It'd been a whirlwind romance, true. But he'd asked her to marry him. And there was a baby on the way. Where did things go wrong? Soon after Maynard revealed his feelings for his ex, Tammy, Maynard told Michelle he was heading out on a fishing trip. They'd had a lovely morning before he left. Things seemed to be back to normal. Maybe a little space might be nice for the both of them. And they'd figure it all out when he came back, when they'd had time to think. While Maynard was away, Michelle enjoyed some self-care. She did some light gardening. Then, in the evening, she took a nice hot shower while listening to a top 40 radio station on her boombox. This radio station was a fantastic throwback, back to the days where you could call into a radio station, speak with a DJ, and make a request for a song, and dedicate that song to someone special. Just as Michelle was stepping out of the shower, she heard a familiar male voice on the radio. Was that Maynard? Soon enough, the radio DJ asked the man's name, and it was indeed, he said his name was Maynard. Wasn't that romantic? Maynard had called a radio station from some remote place where he was fishing with his buddies, and he's about to dedicate a song to Michelle. How could someone be mad at a guy who did that? It was a love song. After the DJ asked Maynard his name, he asked who he was going to dedicate the song to. Maynard, from Hoover Heights, Ohio, told the DJ he wanted to dedicate this song to the special lady in his life, Tammy. Tammy? Michelle stood there in the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair soaking wet, all of her dreams of marriage, of a future with Dr. Maynard Munsing, spiraling straight down the drain. Michelle quickly got dressed. She was not having any of this. She found out Tammy's address and asked a neighbor to race her over there ASAP. When the car roared into the driveway, there he was, standing right there, with Tammy outside of Tammy's house. The typically mild-mannered Michelle got out of the car and confronted Maynard. "Fishing trip, huh?" she asked, voice thick with bitter sarcasm. "It's not what it looks like," Maynard stammered. The three of them, Michelle and Maynard and Tammy, stood in the driveway, and things got heated. Especially when it turned out that Maynard had told Tammy he was living with a friend. The two women didn't know about each other, and it all blew up in Maynard's face. Michelle realized Maynard wasn't the great guy she thought he was, and she swiftly kicked him out of the house. He was over. She was fine without him, and she could raise this baby on her own. It was the perfect day for a picnic, and Maynard had planned things so carefully. A pink blanket spread out on the green grass, a basket full of treats. It had been a few days since Michelle caught Maynard spending the weekend with his ex, an unpredictable firecracker of a woman named Tammy, who seemed the opposite of Michelle. Michelle vowed it was over, but when he called and invited her out to a picnic so they could talk things over, she agreed, just to hear him out. It was a lapse in judgment. He'd made a mistake. He'd let this she-devil back into his life, but it was over. Could Michelle forgive him, please? Michelle wanted this to work, and she was ready to take Maynard back. But before she could share her feelings, she was suddenly overcome once again with stomach cramps worse than ever before. It was like the flu or food poisoning, and then she started bleeding. And despite what her doctor said, this wasn't stress. It was real. Michelle was early enough in her pregnancy that she could have been experiencing something called hyperemesis gravidarum, a rare and severe form of extreme morning sickness. The causes of morning sickness and hyperemesis gravidarum are unclear. It's possible that these symptoms are related to a rapid increase in the levels of two hormones in early pregnancy: HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which is produced by the placenta early in pregnancy, and estrogen, which helps maintain the pregnancy. It's more common during a woman's first pregnancy, and this was Michelle's first. Another factor was if the woman was carrying twins. Michelle had a twin sister, and fraternal twins, at least, can be hereditary. Was it possible she was suffering from hyperemesis gravidarum and carrying twins, and the ultrasound missed something? But when she went to the doctor, he did an ultrasound and everything looked fine, and he told her once again that this was all basically in her head. All that pressure she was putting on herself and her fiancé. Michelle assumed the doctor was right. And the good news was, her relationship was back on track. there was talk of marriage again. Maynard was working his way back into Michelle's life, and he acted like the doting father-to-be, rubbing Michelle's back, keeping her hydrated by bringing her drinks from the kitchen so she could rest and watch TV. It was Michelle's twin sister, Melinda, who connected the dots. "Isn't it odd," Melinda said, "that you're fine when Maynard comes by, and after he leaves, you're sick?" Michelle was horrified. What was her sister implying? And then, bam, her mind flashed back. Key West. Maynard brought the drinks from the bar. Then the picnic, when Maynard had brought the food and pre-made drinks. Then, just recently, when he'd handed her a soda and she felt ill afterwards. There was indeed a correlation between Maynard bringing her drinks and Michelle falling ill. Were the drinks that Maynard brought her the cause of her illness? She needed to find out. Her baby's life depended on it. Maynard told Michelle he was heading on vacation with his kids, but Michelle wasn't fooled this time. She ventured over to Tammy's house, and once again, Maynard's car was there. She wasn't sure exactly how she wanted to play this. She tiptoed to the side of the house and saw Maynard with Tammy through an open window. Michelle hid off to the side, but close enough that she could hear them, and she heard her name again and again. They were talking about Michelle and her pregnancy. And Tammy asked Maynard what he planned to do. Maynard's answer was ghoulish and ominous. He said that he'd already taken care of it. Michelle realized now. Her perfect man was poisoning her and her unborn baby. Michelle didn't know what she was going to do, but she did know this was not a situation that she should handle by herself. She went to the local police department in Huber Heights, Ohio. Huber Heights is a rural suburb just outside of Dayton, Ohio. Back in 2000, the population of Huber Heights was just under 40,000 people. There wasn't much crime in Huber Heights, so when Michelle met the two detectives at the precinct, what she told them was like nothing they'd ever heard before. That this woman's fiancé, a well-respected doctor in the community, and his girlfriend wanted to kill Michelle, or at the very least, poison her baby? Skeptical, they wanted Michelle to take a polygraph test. But they weren't allowed to do a polygraph test on a pregnant woman. Now, there's no evidence that a polygraph exam would cause any harm to a pregnant individual, but there was a question of reliability and how fetal movement and a pregnant body's reaction to that movement, like a baby kicking, might compromise the polygraph test results. So the police basically told her. They sympathized, but without evidence, there was nothing they could do. Michelle took a hard look at her situation. She was alone. She was pregnant. And her cheating fiancé and his scheming partner were out to harm her and her baby. As a firefighter and a paramedic, she'd bravely fought to save the lives of countless people, complete strangers. Now she had to bravely fight for herself and for her baby. And prove to authorities, Dr. Maynard Munsing wasn't a pillar of the community, but a cold and calculating killer. Michelle set up a trap. She invited Maynard over for dinner, throw a couple of steaks on the grill, and have a relaxing night. Before Maynard arrived, she planted a video camera behind a fake plant on a kitchen shelf that overlooked the counter area near the sink. When Maynard arrived, she told him she would go outside and put the steaks on the grill, and would he mind bringing her a Coke? Of course he wouldn't mind. It would be his pleasure. Now, Michelle was outside and unable to see anything happening in real time. So she had no idea what or if the cameras were capturing him doing anything, or if he was doing anything. But when he brought her a glass full of refreshing and effervescent Coca-Cola, she kept her cool. She thanked him and excused herself, then went into the bathroom. In the bathroom, she poured the contents of the glass into a plastic container. And when she did, she noticed at the bottom of the glass was a thick white sludge. Michelle didn't know what that sludge was, but she knew it was potentially deadly, and that she was meant to drink it. After she poured everything from that glass of Coke into the container, she rinsed out the cup and, at least in the reenactment, pulled a backup can of Coke that she'd hidden in the bathroom cabinet and poured that decoy Coke into the glass, and returned to the living room where Maynard was and sipped her drink. As she ate dinner across from the man who just tried to poison her, she felt genuinely sick, but she had to pretend everything was fine, which was challenging for another reason. All throughout dinner, the landline kept ringing. Each time Michelle picked up, it was Tammy, demanding to speak with Maynard. What more did this woman want? Maynard left that night, and not long after, he called Michelle. And he asked her if she knew why Tammy had called so much and why she seemed so upset. No, Michelle said. Tell me why Tammy was so upset. Because, Maynard said, Tammy is my wife. Michelle learned that Maynard and Tammy had gotten married that very week. Michelle knew it was over. Maynard knew it was over. So was that the reason why he wanted to poison her? She couldn't fathom it. Couldn't imagine it. Well, and she didn't need to imagine it. She had it all on tape. As Michelle watched the secret camera footage taken from the hidden camera buried in the fake plant. There Maynard was, wearing a puffy late 90s button-down shirt tucked into his pleated khakis, moving from the fridge to get the soda, then, pulling something from his pocket, he scooped out something and added it to her glass. Michelle was shocked and horrified. His body language was terrifying. He looked so emotionless and proficient, like he'd done this before. Michelle believed that she had the evidence she needed, and she took the container with the soda and the white sludge inside to the authorities. And step one was finding out what was inside that glass. Authorities sent the sample with the white sludge to a forensic chemist, who wasn't quite sure where to start. There were hundreds of drugs out there, toxic chemicals from acrylamide to sodium hydroxide to sodium azide to trypan blue, to name a few. Maynard, he was a doctor, and one of the detectives had a hunch that the powder was probably from a prescription drug, one that a doctor like Maynard knew would cause harm to a fetus if ingested by a pregnant woman. And the drug that seemed most likely was a drug prescribed for stomach ulcers called Cytotec. Right there, on a bottle of Cytotec, was a warning that this drug was dangerous for pregnant women and could induce labor and lead to miscarriage. The forensic chemist went to work to prove the white sludge in Michelle's glass was Cytotec. This being forensic files, the chemist put the sample in a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer.
Gas chromatograph mass spectrometer.
Also known as the GCMS. A GCMS is like a Reese's peanut butter cup of chemical detection. Two great things that worked even better together. Gas chromatography and mass spectrometry were both invented in the early 1900s. Then, They were merged together in the 1950s. According to the American Chemical Society, GCMS remains one of the most powerful, flexible, and widely used tools for analyzing chemical mixtures and the concentration of chemicals in drug screening, forensic science, environmental analysis, including the analysis of material found on Mars. And here's how it works. A gas chromatograph separates and detects individual compounds found in a complex chemical structure, like a prescription drug. Then the MS, the mass spectrometer, measures the qualitative and quantitative value of the molecular weight of the ions present in those compounds. A mass spectrometer charts a compound's chemical structure, which is unique, like a chemical fingerprint. In the case of the white sludge found in Michelle's glass, the forensic chemist put a sample of that sludge into the GCMS and analyzed the results of that chemical fingerprint. And compared to the chemical fingerprint found in the drug Cytotec, it was a match. The drug that Maynard used to poison Michelle was confirmed to be Cytotec. They had proof that in the hands of Dr. Maynard Munsing, a drug used for stomach ulcers was also capable of inducing labor, and served as compelling evidence that Maynard used the drug to force Michelle to have a miscarriage. And Michelle had irrefutable evidence that Maynard had put it in her glass. Or so Michelle thought. What she saw and what authorities saw were two different things. Where Michelle saw hard evidence, Maynard pouring white powder into her drink, the police saw a weak case. In the video, leaves from the fake plant partially obscured a small part of the lens of her hidden camera. And because the angle of the camera was a little high and filmed far away, you couldn't see what exactly he was doing. The authorities worried that if this footage went to court, a good defense lawyer would say this wasn't sufficient proof, and that Michelle had poured the substance inside the glass herself to frame her cheating fiancé for revenge. So here she was again, not enough evidence. And with each day that passed, Michelle was at greater risk. Who knew where else he'd put this substance? Her refrigerator could be filled with items that he'd poisoned. What was Michelle supposed to do now? Fortunately, detectives had a plan. They'd set up their own trap, a live sting operation. Michelle invited Maynard over once again. Dinner, take 2. It was exactly as before, including Michelle leaving the kitchen to throw those 2 steaks on the grill. The Huber Heights authorities installed a hidden camera inside a knick-knack. And in a poetic nod to Michelle, this knick-knack was a figurine of a firefighter saving a child. And they mixed the figurine amongst her other ones, so it blended in, while offering the detectives a perfect view. A perfect view from Michelle's garage, where the 2 detectives sat, watching a monitor with a video feed of the hidden camera. And this time, they had all the angles on tape. Maynard can be seen taking a vial from his pocket and shaking it out, placing the powder in her drink. That was it. They got him. The detectives took about 20 steps from the garage into Michelle's kitchen and made their arrest. And when they did, Maynard was perfectly framed and caught on tape by the hidden camera. There'd be no steak for Maynard. With his hands cuffed behind his back, Michelle entered the room, and she was able to say a few choice words. That she told him that he didn't need to have anything to do with this baby, that she'd said she'd happily raise the baby herself, and yet he still tried to kill her and her unborn child. His efforts to try and end Michelle's life and the life of her baby took weeks, months, and his life was over in 6 minutes when they hauled him off to jail where he was charged of attempted murder of the baby, and when he asked why he did it, Maynard said he wanted to get rid of the problem. Exactly who was the problem, the baby or Michelle, he never said. As Maynard awaited trial, Michelle went for ultrasounds, and the fetus appeared healthy. But just before Maynard's trial at 28 weeks, Michelle lost her baby. It was a devastating loss. Did that mean Maynard, who was just about to face trial, could be charged with murder? Unfortunately, no, because tests performed post-mortem by the medical examiner didn't reveal any cytotech in the placenta, and therefore the cause of death was undetermined. But Michelle believed Maynard was responsible, as was his wife Tammy, but she wasn't sure, with everything that had happened, if she wanted to face a lengthy trial. Ultimately, with Michelle's permission, prosecutors offered a plea deal to both Maynard and Tammy. Tammy pleaded guilty for her role in filling the prescription for the cytotech, and she got probation. Maynard pleaded guilty for contaminating a substance for human consumption and for attempted felonious assault. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and lost his medical license. This episode aired years ago, and since then, he's been released from prison. And rumors swirling online in the 27,000 members of the Forensic Files Reddit group suggest that Maynard might have changed his name and is working as a used car salesman in rural Ohio. A fate that for an arrogant former doctor like Maynard is its own form of punishment. And for the rest of us, it's an unforgettable lesson in treachery and deception by a man caught in circumstances between two women. A woman he wants, and another woman, a pregnant woman, whose existence is the problem that threatens his future. I don't know if it's a story as old as time, but it's a story that goes back in the United States at least 100 years. With a real-life murder case from the early 1900s that captured America's attention. A murder and a trial that was transformed into one of the most important books in the true crime canon, penned by a famous journalist named Theodore Dreiser. The book is called An American Tragedy. An American Tragedy is essential reading. There's just one catch. The book is 900 pages long. That's 34 hours of audio, which I'm thinking I might attempt to turn into a Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime story. For now, thank you for listening to this special Dead Sleep version of Forensic Files. And if this concept is successful, and I hope it is, we'll do more of them in the coming months. And if you have a favorite Forensic Files episode you'd love to hear as a Dead Sleep story, let us know at DeadSleepPod on Instagram, or email deadsleeppodcast@gmail. Thank you so much for being a subscriber and keeping the show independent and ad-free. We'll be back soon with another true crime story made for bedtime. Until then, nighty-night.